Welcome to the Burisch Archive Podcasts, a series of focused discussion around the controversial claims of Dr. Dan Burisch.
Today's deep dive, treaties.
Okay, so today we are jumping into what is, I think, arguably the most substantial part of the entire Burisch Archive.
It really is. We're talking about the core agreements, the treaties made between humanity's secret governance and, well, several non-human species.
And we have to take this one slow. I mean, this is foundational stuff, and the claims are just immense. So we need to be really methodical here.
Absolutely. The mission today is to, pull apart the layers of these agreements. They're known as the T9 Treaties.
T9, and these aren't just simple documents, right?
Not at all. This is a complex, multilateral, diplomatic situation. You have our group's majestic, the Committee of the Majority on one side, and on the other you have multiple ET groups.
People often focus on the J-rods because of Dan's work.
They do, but the sources are clear. The J-rods are just one piece of a much bigger puzzle that also involves Orions and Reticulans. It's a very crowded table.
And these treaties, they aren't just history. The claim is they are living protocols that influence things even now.
That's the core of it. So to understand them, we have to go back to the beginning, to the inciting incident.
The event that forced our hand.
Exactly. We're talking about the 1953 crash near Kingman, Arizona. That was the moment everything changed. It forced a direct confrontation and, the need for some kind of binding terms.
And this was a J-rod craft.
It was a three-person crew.
Three. And what was the immediate outcome of that crash?
Well, one of the crew died at the scene, but two were recovered alive. And that's really where the intense operational secrecy just exploded.
So two survivors, what happened to them?
They were immediately segregated, split up based on what our people assessed their function to be.
Okay, tell me about that. Where did they go?
The first one, who was identified as a P+45, was taken to Los Alamos.
Los Alamos. For technology, I assume.
Precisely. The records say this individual worked with a mechanical engineer, a man named Bill Uhouse. Their entire focus was on the craft itself, propulsion, avionics, reverse engineering.
And the second survivor, the one who becomes so central to Dan Burisch's work later on.
That was the P+52, a completely different story. This being was assessed as a diplomat, maybe even a spy.
And he was sent to Area 51.
To the S4 facility specifically, deep under Papoose Mountain, just south of Groom Lake. This J-rod was named Kiela.
Sometimes spelled Kayla in the documents.
Right, and it's a critical point in the source material that Kiela was male.
So you have two tracks from day one. One is pure tech at Los Alamos. The other is biology and diplomacy at S4. What was that S4 environment like? The sources make it sound incredibly hostile.
Hostile is an understatement. It was an extreme containment unit they called the clean sphere.
The clean sphere.
It was a pressurized hydrogen environment, kept incredibly cold, and, this is crucial, it was deliberately engineered to have almost no oxygen. Not enough for a human to breathe anyway.
Which is why Dan, and anyone else, had to wear those big suits.
Exactly. A total encapsulated suit, or TES. You'd freeze and suffocate without it. The whole facility was deep underground, with levels coded 41 through 45. Kiela was on the deepest level, 45.
And just one level above him, on 42, that's where they kept the looking glass.
The great prize, as the sources call it. Some kind of Stargate tech. So you see the strategy. They're holding their most valuable asset right next to their most valued piece of recovered technology.
But who is running this strategy? I mean, everyone talks about Majestic 12.
They do, but the sources say by 1963, MJ-12 was no longer the top of the pyramid. The power had shifted.
Shifted to who? This is key to understanding who actually signed these treaties.
It shifted to a group called the Committee of the Majority.
The Committee of the Majority. And they weren't military.
No. The description is 33 men deeply connected to Masonic orders, holding immense power in global government and finance, secretly headquartered in the U.S. but with international reach.
So why the change from MJ-12? Why did they need this new group?
Well, MJ-12 was more of an intelligence gathering and first response outfit, but when they realized the scale of this, the timeline paradox, the advanced tech, they needed a political authority that wasn't limited by presidential terms.
Ah, something that could provide continuity.
Exactly. These decisions would affect humanity for centuries. You needed an unbroken, secret chain of command. They were the ones overseeing Project Aquarius, which was the umbrella project for all ET contact.
That makes a terrifying amount of sense. So with this committee in charge, let's get into the T9 Treaties themselves. What was the deal? What was the trade?
The trade was It was monumental. It was an ultimatum, really. The ET groups, the J-Rods and their associated brothers, offered a solution to some of our most fundamental problems, specifically biological technology.
This is the Intergalactic Humanitarian Aid Package I've read about.
That's the phrase. They offered something called the Ganesh particles, or Lotus. It's described as a technology that can tweak, even reassemble genetic code.
So basically, cure any disease, generate life itself.
That was the offer. The key to biological mastery. The ultimate gift.
Okay, an offer like that has to come with an equally massive price. What did we have to give up?
Everything. The price, according to the leaker transcription source, was absolute. Humanity had to totally scrap all nuclear weapons.
And all of them.
All of them. And abandon all nuclear power development completely.
That's not a deal, that's a surrender. That's ending our entire military-industrial complex as we know it. Why such a hard line on nuclear tech?
Because the J-Rods are us from the future. And in their timeline, nuclear conflict and proliferation, that was the original sin, the catastrophic mistake that created the timeline paradox they're now trying to escape.
So this wasn't about helping us. It was about saving themselves.
It was pure self-preservation. They were trading the cure for death in exchange for us eliminating the weapon that ultimately doomed them.
And if we said no? Or if we cheated?
The ultimatum was chilling. If humanity weaponized their biological tech or failed to get rid of the nukes, the quote is that humanity will be erased from the history of the universe. That threat drove the whole deal. The T9 Treaty was set to hold until 2005, with a major renegotiation in 2003, all of it frantically aimed at preventing the 2012 catastrophe their timeline predicted.
That level of threat. It explains so much. And it connects directly to Kaela and the medical work Dan Burisch was brought in to do.
It's all connected. The J-Rods were suffering from a terrible genetic decay. The technical term is a paraprotein-related monoclonal gammopathy. Think of it as a horrifying progressive nerve disorder, something like Cockayne syndrome, but worse.
And Dan's job was to find a cure for that in the clean sphere.
Yes, he was working on retroviruses to treat Kaela. They were desperate to prevent their own extinction, which is all tied up with this idea of a broken resonance with the Orions around that 2012 date.
Okay, and this is where it gets really dark. This is where Project Aquarius moves into abductions and hybridization. Why? If they had this godlike genetic tech, why did they need to abduct people?
Because they needed fresh, current human genetic material. They had to introduce our genes into their line.
For what purpose?
It was a two-pronged goal. First, to fix their own catastrophic genetic disease. And second, and this is a direct quote, to immunize themselves against the current populace and remain as current timeline residents.
My God. So they were creating hybrids. The sources say Dan was horrified by this, calling them rogues or monsters.
It was genetic engineering completely overriding natural selection, and it shows the power dynamic. It wasn't a partnership. The sources even mention political dishonesty among the ETs themselves.
What do you mean?
A different group, the P+45 J-Rods, apparently used deception on their abductees. They'd focus them on trivial things like their skin condition to hide the true horrifying purpose of the genetic harvesting.
So not even a unified front, just desperate factions looking out for themselves. This brings us back to the power dynamic. It sounds incredibly imbalanced.
Completely. They were dependent on our genetics, but they held the ultimate trump card over our survival. One source describes their view of us as a house of wild, out-of-control teenagers.
And they were the parents coming home to lay down the law.
To set the ground rules, which were unbreakable and everlasting. That's the quote.
So the Committee of the Majority, our secret rulers, they were forced to go along with all of this.
Yeah.
The abductions, the hybridization, all of it.
They had no choice. The sources claim the reality is much darker than the concocted conspiracy. Cooperation wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. The looking glass showed them what would happen if they didn't. The 2012 cataclysm would be a certainty. It was cooperate or face annihilation.
And even Kaela, the diplomat, was suffering.
Deeply. The sources say that despite his incredible intelligence, smarter than Dan, apparently Kaela was profoundly depressed. He was a captive and he felt it. But he still cooperated, holding out his arm for painful sample extractions. It was a necessary sacrifice for him, too.
It reframes everything. These agreements weren't made in good faith. They were born from captivity, desperation, and coercion. So how does this connect to today? How do these decades-old treaties influence what's happening now with disclosure?
There was a major shift, according to the sources, after the Cycles Cross event around the 2009-2012 timeframe. Elements within the Majestic structure realized the old way wasn't working. The timeline was still unstable.
So they needed a new strategy.
a managed release of information. They called it Project Patchwork.
A spoon-feeding of the truth to the public.
Right, to prevent mass panic. And that plan seems to have really kicked into high gear after 2016.
Which lines up perfectly. I mean, after 2016, you get the New York Times article, the Navy videos being officially released, high-level whistleblowers like David Grush appearing, even Hollywood getting in on it with disclosure-themed movies.
Exactly. The theory in the source material is that this is the new protocol, the allowance for people to speak, the continuous leaks of information. This is the manifestation of the post-2016 treaty terms. Instead of the apocalyptic nuclear outcome, we get a slow, controlled disclosure.
A soft landing, dictated by the terms of the T9 Treaties.
It seems that way.
So, if there's one key takeaway from this, it's that the relationship described in the Burisch Archive isn't one of equals. It's a structure built on duress. Future humans needing our genetics, setting unbreakable rules to stop us from destroying ourselves, because that, in turn, destroys them. And understanding that, that's the key to making sense of the disclosure headlines we see every day.
And it leaves you with a really profound question to think about. If the J-Rod's entire identity is built around their catastrophic future, how much of our current global policy, our anxieties, our spending, how much of it is actually being dictated by the fear of their past instead of the real needs of our present?
Thank you for listening to the Burisch Archive Podcasts.
Check back for further detailed analysis on other aspects of Dan's claims and their extraordinary connection to our current understanding of our relationship to the extraordinary.